I was kind of ashamed of my Asianness, and I always wanted to feel like that I fit in. I have a cousin in Melbourne. They would always say like Asian pride, and I'd be like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm Australian.
In this episode, we're joined by Michelle Lim, an organisational culture and change lead, an advocate for intersectional diversity, ethics, and equity and inclusion in the workplace.
As the oldest girl in the family, it feels like a duty to want to show up for your sisters and your parents, and you do sometimes feel like you're holding a lot and you're holding everyone's stuff. Sometimes a backpack is so freaking heavy, but you can't unload it. And then when it was okay for me to let go, my mental health plummeted. If you look at our leadership in any organisation, there isn't a direct reflection in terms of ratio or stats of people that look like us in leadership. So I don't understand the arguments, you should just be based on merit. Well, what is merit? Merit's subjective.
Some people who might not understand our side of the argument might not have the resources to understand that because they come from a perspective of this is just their world.
You can set up infrastructure and policies and all that sort of in place, but if you can't change the people behind it, then it's not going to matter really.
We don't talk about race. I'll give you an example, Harmony Day. Harmony Day isn't actually what it is. I feel like this is a bit contentious and people might get upset with me for saying this, but...
Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, onto today's episode.
Thanks for coming all the way from Bondi, Michelle, to Parramatta to record in our studio. But I know we've just off camera, we've had a lot of conversations around like corporate and what you've been doing lately. I personally don't have a lot of experience or at all in corporate, so I have a lot of questions around that. But obviously, Ken, you guys connected, was it over LinkedIn before this?
I think it was like 40 under 40s, right?
Yeah,
and then
I reached out to you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And obviously congrats on, being part of that. And then, that's how it got sort of on my radar. And then we just had a chat. I remember we got on a call. And I remember the first impression was, oh my God, she speaks well.
Really? Oh,
yeah, so well.
Nervous.
No.
Nervous.
I think Ken came off that call and he was like, he said the same thing. He was like, wow. She's really well-rounded, like she does everything.
I think I just noticed these things.
Yeah.
Obviously you've got an interesting story and you're going to share it on this podcast today as well. But obviously I think backstory, if you just want to maybe tell us a little bit about childhood and growing up here in Sydney.
So I was born in Sydney, born and raised, and my parents are migrants. Dad's Chinese Malaysian and mum's Thai Vietnamese, so very mixed household.
Yeah.
And it was a very noisy, like when I look back at my childhood and growing up, it was like chaotic, like noisy, like messy, but like always so much fun. And I always felt like very held and very supported. So I'm one of 4 girls.
Whoa.
I'm the oldest. And for all 4 of us is like super, super close. I guess we're a very like close family. But also in some ways that stereotypical Asian family too. Like mum was very loving and very like touchy and like would give us hugs. Yeah, she would give us hugs, but dad was the opposite. Yeah. Dad's like
stoic.
Yeah, very stoic, like never missed a day of work ever, like even when he's sick. And just not very emotionally open with us. Like it was really interesting because whenever we needed that, we would go to mum.
Yeah.
And then dad was like just very advice and practical kind of person. So that was kind of like what the home environment was like. But in terms of like growing up, I went to a Catholic primary school. My mum's Catholic, so we were raised Catholic, but dad's Buddhist. So it was super interesting to kind of also have that difference at home and how we navigated that. We would go to church every weekend. Dad wouldn't receive communion, but we did because we were all baptized. And then the trade-off, mum and dad would we always talk about the trade-off that they had was that mum would be able to baptize us, but dad would give us a Chinese name. So we all have Chinese names and it's all like our official name plus our English name. And dad's like, that's how I'm going to have my piece of like, and then mum's like, but they're still Catholic. Yeah, you know, so it's like, so that's how they did it. And then I just remember always having like so much food and yeah, it was just like your stereotypical kind of growing up in Southwest Sydney kind of family. When I look back at it now, I was quite embarrassed. And I don't know if this is something that you can resonate with, but I was kind of ashamed of my like Asianness. And and I always wanted to feel like, you know, I fit in somehow. And like I have a cousin in Melbourne. They would always say like Asian pride, and I'd be like, I'm so embarrassed.
Like that's not me.
Yeah, that's not me. Like I'm Australian. In retrospect now, like I'm a very proud like Asian Australian, like super proud of it. Like I'll scream it from the rooftops, and I want everyone to feel that way. I think must be a generational thing, because my sister, who's like 19, she feels a lot more like comfortable in her kind of heritage and her identity, whereas I kind of found a lot of it was a struggle kind of navigating those two worlds and trying to feel like I fit in at school, trying to feel like you know, I was one person at home and I was one person like at school and with my friends. So that was difficult. But I think something that a lot of kids growing up in the 90s probably felt.
Did you grow up with a lot of Asians around you?
There were some Asian kids at school, but I think because it was a Catholic primary school, it was pretty diverse, because I grew up, like the area that I grew up, we had all sorts of cultures. We had a lot of Lebanese, a lot of Italians, a lot of Greeks. I think it was definitely a suburb and an area where a lot of immigrants kind of settled. So I grew up in Riverwood, like down Southwest Sydney, kind of near Bankstown, and I was always around that area. So not that many Asians, to be honest. So when when I would go to Hurstville with mum and dad, I'm like, okay, this is my people. This is my people. This is like, I feel at home. Yeah. And that's where we would, and Bankstown as well. Like there was, I guess, more Vietnamese there, but we would go there for all of our ingredients once a week. And like, that's where I think we all felt very comfortable. But where I grew up, not really. Yeah. Like always kind of the odd one out.
Okay. Before I ask you about your uni experience, I just wanted to ask, like, refugee parents, what did they kind of do for work?
As migrants, they came over here, I think more than 30 years now. Mum came over here to initially study at, I can't even remember what she was studying, but then she just didn't go ahead with it. So she did like half of her university degree overseas in Bangkok, and then she came over here with the intention to finishing it, but her mum was actually quite sick. Okay. So like any good Asian daughter, she was like, I need to just earn the money so I can support and that I can make sure that my mum has the most comfortable care as she can, and have, you know, everything that she needs. And I think that does weigh still heavily on her, like now, like when she talks about her mum and some of the regrets that she has, she's like, maybe I should have just stayed there and just been there with mum. Yeah. And then dad came here as well to study, but also didn't finish. Dad was kind of, he was kind of the black sheep in his family. So on my dad's side of the family, a lot of my aunties and uncles are very academic. So they've done PhDs or they're doctors at Oxford, and they're all like engineers, and then I think dad always felt like the black sheep of the family. And also I think they did, you know, have that kind of perception of him as well, like, oh, he's not very academic, you know, but I think my dad's so incredibly smart, and so is my mum. Like, to be able to raise four strong women in a completely different country with nothing, you don't even have like a university degree to kind of give you that foundation, and they just had to hustle. And also dad's like incredibly smart. Like if you need something, like, I don't know, give him like a plastic bottle and a string, and then he'll make something out of it, and it's like the most practical thing ever. Like, he needs to go on that show Alone. Have you seen that show? I'm like, I think dad would survive. I think he would win the $250,000. No, dad's great. So dad came over here to study as well, but then he kind of started his own business with one of his brothers that's now in Melbourne, and did pretty well for themselves. But then they kind of separated. The other brother is now in Melbourne, and dad stayed in Sydney. And then he was like, oh crap, like I'm a young dad he just found out my mum was pregnant at the time, and he was like, I don't have any work, what do I do? So then he went into like the first thing that he could find, which was a trade, and he's a butcher.
Wow.
And so I grew up, you know, very humble kind of household, but it was it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think they both work really, really hard, super, super hard. And mum did a little bit of work when she got here, but then she eventually, you know, because we were quite sick as kids, and I was quite sick as a young girl. So mum decided just to stay at home and give us the care that we needed. Yeah, she's like always there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then take us through your university experience, like going from high
sure.
school and then to university.
Sure. So I had a bit of unconventional like high school experience. So I mentioned just before that I was quite sick as like a young girl. So I had really bad eczema, like chronic, severe eczema, like hospital kind of eczema.
Yeah, wow.
So I was in and out of hospital as a young girl all the time with like wet dressings, like covering my whole body because my skin was just horrible. I could barely even lift my arm up without
Tearing
or so it was quite bad. So mum was like caring for me full time. So I never really went to school. Like when I think about it now, and I did like a calculation of like how many days on average I went to school in primary school in the beginning of high school, and on average it was probably around 30 to 45 days a year that I was at school.
Shit.
I was like never at school.
Because you were just like in pain.
I was always in the hospital, or I was either at home just because I couldn't get to school because of the medication. So my education was quite disrupted, but I think I was always very disciplined, so I would always just do my own homeschooling. And my saving grace actually was ballet. So I did a lot of ballet growing up. I love dance. I love contemporary jazz. That's kind of what me and my sisters did to begin with. And then I kind of was obsessed with ballet and decided that that's something that I wanted to do. My skin started to get better as well towards the beginning of high school. So I was able to kind of dive a little bit deeper into my ballet studies. And then I eventually left conventional high schooling in year 9, and I did homeschooling. So I did distance education, and I would go to dance. I did full-time ballet studies, and I would dance throughout the day, and I would come home and then do my high school work. And then I did that for a couple years, and then that was kind of like my thing. And then in terms of university, I came back, so I was in Hong Kong for a little while doing ballet, but then, you know, there was health stuff, there was family stuff, and then I decided to come home. And then I had a bit of like a mini early midlife crisis, and I was like, who am I? What am I doing? I'm not doing ballet anymore. I was known as like Mish, the ballet person. That's not me. So what do I do? And then thank God, like while I was overseas in Hong Kong, I was still doing my high school like HSC studies, because that's what that was a condition that, you know, my parents were like, you need to finish high school. Yeah. So I finished my HSC, and I had something to kind of fall back on when I got home. So then I decided to study at USyd. I did psychology and neuroscience. It was awesome. And yeah, that was kind of my university journey.
So, wow, that's so unconventional.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm really interested in just hearing you talk about the homeschooling aspect.
Of course.
As someone who, like, I've got a 6-month-old, right? And
cute.
Yeah, he's very cute.
He's so cute.
And trying to...
I love babies.
Yeah. And trying to figure out, you know, I'm a really unconventional person in general about a lot of things in life. And there's something about homeschooling that actually I'm interested in understanding, which is would you sort of say it's like, you know, better or worse? I don't think there's one better than the other, but what sort of suits the actual individual child more, but also partly as being sort of quite nomadic as tendencies for me. I like to sort of change locations. That's always been my life. I've changed locations quite a few times and done a lot of traveling. And so I sort of saw homeschooling as something that allows, you know, a child to be able to get that consistency in their education without being tethered to a certain location. But like, what was homeschooling like for you? Did you enjoy it?
For me, it was just a means to an end, because I had to do it because I was at ballet during the day. I think speaking to other students that were also doing the same program that I did. So a lot of the kids that were part of this distance education high school were either actors or athletes or
so
people that did
else.
Professional sports.
Right.
They had something else. But if I'm just putting on my like psych hat, I think it really depends on the kid. And also it's not the quantity, like obviously because I didn't go to school really. If you think about it, I was barely at school. It's like the quality and the home environment that cultivates like that continual curiosity. And I think I had that at home, like always learning about something, always had, I don't know, Dad couldn't travel much because we didn't have that much growing up. Like I would consider ourselves pretty like low socioeconomic status. So we weren't able to travel that much, but we were able to watch documentaries and food.
Nice.
Like Dad and I would just sit and watch like the Food Channel.
Really?
Like that's what, like I was obsessed. Like I'm still a big foodie and Dad's also a really big foodie. We just, our like family group chat is just me and Dad talking about food.
Yeah.
And then like my sister's chiming in with other stuff. Like it's not like a fluid conversation. Everyone's having a conversation with someone else. It's so funny. You should see our family group chat. It's hilarious. But yeah, so I think if you can foster, like, in terms of homeschooling, if you can like foster that and feed that like natural curiosity that children have and that I'm sure your son will have, then I think homeschooling is like fine. Like I don't think there's any issues with homeschooling. I will say that kids do need some sort of structure and consistency. So if you decide to go down that route, or if I decide to go down that route when I have kids, I would set that curriculum or have that structure of like, this is what we're going to do, but within the realms of what's interesting to you.
Yep.
And I think as long as they have
so
that.
it's still curiosity based, but with structure as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I mean, speaking of curiosity, you mentioned obviously like giving up ballet.
Yeah.
You know, like it was such a big part of your life as well. Any particular factors that weighed in on that? Just because obviously you could have kept going. You chose. You obviously mentioned, you alluded to obviously maybe some stuff at home, which obviously it's up to you whether or not you want to share. But sort of how did that come about? Because I imagine someone who's sort of spent such a long time, you know, it's almost like, your identity. You're like, I am this person. And all of a sudden you're like, no, don't want to do it anymore.
So I think for me, it was a mixture of a few things, like kind of what I alluded to before. I don't want to dive in too much detail about it just because I don't have like it's not 100% my story. It's also my sister's story, my mum's story, my family's story, and I don't have their consent. And I don't know how much of themselves that they want to share, but I can talk about my experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I was going through my own mental health struggles, and it was very difficult for me because I was 17 when I was over there. I was on my own. It was a difficult time. You know, I had to have the discipline of being able to get up in the morning and do what I was committed to do, but then also still continue with my like HSC studies. And that was just a lot, especially for somebody that at the time I was not in the right mental health space. So I think there was a lot of things going on, and that kind of made me realize like I need to come home. Like it's not it's not the right place for me. I wanted to be there so badly because that's what I worked towards, but I just wasn't in the right mental health space to give myself the best chance. I think it wouldn't have been fair for little Michelle. Now that I think about it, if I stayed there. But then as well, like I said, my family was going through a lot of health stuff. So there was some cancer stuff in the family. And I think as, you know, as the oldest kind of girl in the family as well, there is a little bit of responsibility that you hold. It feels like, and it's not even just like, it feels like a duty to want to show up for your sisters and your parents and your mum. And you do sometimes feel like you're holding a lot and you're holding everyone's stuff. And that sometimes a backpack is so freaking heavy, but you can't unload it quite yet. And you know, you just got to keep
you hold it together basically.
Yeah, you need to hold your shit together until it's okay for you to let go. And then when it was okay for me to let go, I let go and I was not well. Like my mental health plummeted.
From a timeline perspective though, what was that? How old were you at the time?
From a timeline perspective, so it was the ballet stuff, I came back. It was the cancer stuff that I went through with my family was very traumatic. Not just for me. I think for me it was actually it wasn't that traumatic for me, only in the sense that I was very used to the hospital setting. And also I think I was blinded by just hope, because we almost lost my little sister so many times. She ended up in ICU a few times. We lost the room that she was in, that she was receiving chemotherapy from, like every 2 weeks she would go in. All those kids in that room aren't here today. They're all gone. So we saw that. We saw each one like slowly fade away. It was like a lot. Like now that I'm thinking about it, I was like, holy that's like not a great place to be.
And to have to like consume it on.
And I was only around in my early 20s or 20 at the time. In and out of hospital with Cass, also back at home, also trying to juggle uni. So it was a lot.
That's
to
a
carry.
lot to compartmentalize as
Yeah,
well, like,
it
with
was,
the rest of your life.
But also very
For
disruptive
sure.
because like you talked about obviously your own health issues and then to uproot, go to Hong Kong by yourself and then come back and then deal with that all in the space of like basically a time period that many people classify as like a great time of growth and, you know, education and building relationships. Like a lot of that really didn't sort of, I guess, also exist for you.
Exactly. And if you think about it as well, because I didn't go to school that much, and also I didn't go through conventional high school, I didn't really have supportive peers around me. I didn't have, like, all I had was my family, really, and my sisters, who I'm like best friends with, and it's fun to be around them. But they were also going through their own stuff, and we were all coping with it in very different ways. So my coping mechanism is like full control. Yeah. I was like, okay, what's the plan? Is there like a clinical trial that we can put Cassandra in?
Right.
Read the whole thing. What medication is she on? Like, we need to get the injection now. Let's all change our diet. Let's all go plant-based. Let's like, I went like full like mother duck control kind of mode. A couple of my, like one of my siblings completely detached and was just like, this is too much. I can't feel it right now. It's too heavy. If I do, I'm going to explode. So we barely saw her. Another one went full into like her studies. So the other one's very similar to me. If there's something we can control, we will dive into that.
That's their escape.
Yeah, that's our like coping mechanism.
Yep.
So she's like, okay, I can control my studies. She's very academic. So she just went full into like school and like studies and just coped the best way she could. And then Cassandra, like the one that was going through all of it, I think she honestly was just trying to be strong for all of us. She was only 11 at the time. Baby.
Oh my God.
It's crazy. I remember as well, like, and I don't know if you want to include this in the podcast, but when she started losing her hair, it was quite distressing.
From the chemo?
Yeah, from the chemo. It was really distressing for her, and I remember combing her hair. She was like tiny little cute little bubba, like small, so small. She's naturally small like me, but she was tiny. And I was combing her hair and like tufts were coming out, and I didn't know what to say to her, like as I was combing her hair. And then like she just like turned it around and we just started to make fun and light out of it. So we would draw stuff on her head and like make like funny jokes on her head. Like she would wear like really fun hats. Like she'd still go to school on the days that she wasn't getting chemo and try her best, like even though she's
a tough kid.
She's a really tough kid. Now she's actually volunteering at the asylum seeker center.
Wow.
Like, who goes through all of that and goes, what can I do to help other people? Like, I would be like, woe is me. The universe hates me. Like, let me be depressed for a couple of years. Like, everyone should like help me out, you know? But she's like, no, what can I do to serve other people? She's like, she's my everything. Yeah.
That's a lot for a kid to go through and then carry that with the rest
But pressure
of their
creates
life.
diamonds.
Yeah.
Like, I genuinely believe it. Like, as you were telling that story, I sort of could allude to something similar with my mother-in-law who passed away last year.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, look, I mean, but also being stoic about it, and like I can relate to a lot of the stuff that you were talking about. Same thing. She didn't get to wash her hair for such a long time, right? And she was sort of on her way downhill, was terminal, and like, you know, you sort of, and she didn't do chemo, but certainly I think just the malnutrition, you know, and hair is sort of one of the things that's very visible when you don't get enough nutrition in.
Yeah.
And I remember, you know, my wife and I washed her hair, and yeah, you just sort of see tufts of hair come out, and it was just like, it's really tough. And I was the same. I didn't know what to say. Yeah. You almost just be like, you know, hey, just go about, make it as normal as possible, make fun of it, because it's the only way to sort of like keep moving on, right?
Yeah, for sure. But it's heavy.
Yeah. I know you said it's not like your place to share their story, but are you comfortable sharing your story with, you know, unpacking everything and how you were able to actually process everything that you went through.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I think, first of all, I'm really passionate about mental health. I don't think it's something that, I think it's getting better, but especially the Asian like community, I don't think we talk about it enough. I think there's also, in terms of mental health literacy, I don't think, especially my parents' generation, really have that. So it's sometimes really difficult because you might be able to have these types of conversations with your friends and your siblings, but then you don't really feel seen or heard sometimes, even though they love you know they love you.
Yeah. But they go home to their family and it's, you know.
Exactly. And you know your parents love you as well, but they don't really understand. Yeah. So I'm happy to talk about my kind of my journey of unpacking it. I think I'm still unpacking it and still kind of processing it, and it comes in ebbs and flows. So I think for me, like the biggest thing was just accepting that like happened and that it was a really experience. And I'm not really good at acknowledging that. I'm not good at saying this is you know, like this is unfair, because for me it feels like I'm complaining. Like
a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah,
right?
like woe is me, like life's so hard, whatever, just get on with it. Like that's kind of my natural mechanism or natural like way of being, is just like, just get on with the next thing, Mish. Like you can't, there's no point complaining about it. Like it's kind of but like whatever. But I realized, and my partner actually has made me realize that I need to acknowledge that. Like I need to kind of give myself a little bit of space to say that was kind of freaking hard and you got through it in the best way you could. And maybe sometimes not in the most healthy or most conducive way, but you got through it. Like most people who have gone through, you know, that might not even be here.
Yeah.
And that's not saying that they weren't able to get through it. Like I've been lucky. Like I could be on the street. Like I could be anyone, but I had some support from my family, and I'm just grateful for that. But I'm still unpacking it, if I'm being honest. It's hard.
What are the tools that you're using to navigate that whole situation? Like, are you going to therapy? Are you reaching out to friends and family?
For a long time, I really didn't trust the mental health care system here. So when I was having a difficult time in my late teens, I did go see a psychologist, and I studied psychology myself, and I think that's also one of the reasons why I studied it, because I just wanted to understand myself. I just had a really bad experience. It was a very traumatizing experience. It was a very invalidating experience. It was a very like blaming kind of experience, and I think that really scarred me. It took me a long time to build up that trust again, to go and speak to someone about it. And I now go to therapy on like a fortnightly basis, and I think everyone should, and I recognize that's also a privilege to be able to, because that's another topic that we can talk about, but like maybe not for today, but the access to mental health care is appalling.
It's beyond limited.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Like I remember when I was doing the screening to see my recent psychologist, she was like, oh, so why haven't you gone to see a psych, like, you know, in the last couple years, or what made you stop seeing a psych, like when you were in your teens? And she was like, oh, is it because the psychologist wasn't good? Was it because you just felt like it wasn't helpful? And it was really shocking to me that the first thing in her, like that didn't come to her mind was, oh, maybe the barriers to entry in terms of financial barriers to entry would be one of the reasons. And that was my reason. I can't afford to see a psych every week for $250 if I'm from a low SES family.
Let alone once your mental health plan runs out. Like you only have a limited amount before you have to.
Yeah, I remember having like, it's like seeing a psychologist falls under like your private health insurance extras cover, because I remember that, and you sort of like have to pay the gap, because I remember seeing a psychologist quite some time ago with mental health and stress, particularly from work, and it was just like after the 10 sessions it was like, you're on your own, buddy, like you pay for it, it's not covered under Medicare or anything like that. So
but let alone the first few sessions, like time and time again, you have to date your therapist or your psychologist to be able to actually find the right one.
Just to find the right one, right?
And you have to go through the whole screening and unpacking all of your background before realising whether or not this person is helping you or not.
Yeah, exactly. And you only get, I think now it's a little bit better. I think you get up to 20 sessions and there is a little bit of a rebate, but still, like that's, like I can afford that now, right? But a lot of people can't. And like when I went into psychology and I studied psych because I wanted to get into clinical psychology and I wanted to be a psychologist, I didn't, because I realised that I wasn't in the right mental health space I can't even offer myself help or give myself that grace. So how can I do that for others? But I think I was also really jaded by the system, and I was like, I don't want to be part of that, because that would really frustrate me as a clin psych trying to help people, and I can only see them for 10 sessions because that's all they can afford, and I know that I can help them more. So I think that would just be, for me, like really disheartening. And I would feel really disempowered in that role if I did go down that path, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't. And maybe it's something I would revisit again in the future, like do some further study and go down that path. But yeah, that's also one of the reasons why I didn't kind of go further in that psych space.
And there's also a lot of like nuances around that, because even like we talk about the whole Asian Australian mental health area and sort of the lack of wanting to talk about it, and even just not existing, like acknowledgement of the fact that it doesn't exist, right? And you know, we talk about sometimes like how parents, pretty sure all of them went through a huge amount of trauma.
Oh my
Your
gosh.
parents would have, you know, being refugees as well.
Yes.
Just crazy, you know.
Yes.
But all they're trying to do is just survive, and that's why they can't find the tools or resources to be able to help them. This episode is sponsored by Mill on Wines. Mill on Wines are an award-winning family-owned winery located in the renowned wine regions of Barossa Valley, Eden Valley and Clare Valley, presenting a fusion of vineyards that seamlessly infuse new technologies with old world traditions. Their vineyards capture the essence of each region, delivering distinctive wines with complex flavour profiles in small batches, a minimalistic approach that allows the fruit to speak for itself. Explore their range at www.millonwines.com.au. Now, back onto the episode.
You brought up something really interesting just now, both of you, and made me think about something. So I was recently, and I won't bring up the organisation's name, but I was recently part of like a training program with an organisation about how can we better tell our own story and stories in general, and especially stories to do with mental health to empower people. And, you know, my first language is English, so I'm very comfortable in that space. But I also do a lot of work within the diversity, equity, inclusion space. And I also work with a lot of people where English isn't their first language. For my parents, English isn't their first language. I'm also really passionate about improving cultural literacy in the workplace. So when I did that training, I had a reflection, because they said, do you have any questions? And like, and I asked like the organisers a question, and I was like, language is so powerful. Sometimes when you have the word for something, you feel like heard and seen.
Totally, yeah.
I was just wondering, are you delivering this program through the lens of like that cultural lens? Because it will be so different. Like, you can't deliver this program to somebody where English isn't their first language, and that's the people that need it most. Cool. Like, it's great that I was part of the program, but I have the language to talk about it.
Yeah.
How, like, what are we doing for those communities? And they couldn't give me an answer, really. And it's, for me, that's like something that I think is a gap. Like, how can we bridge that gap? And I know there's a few organisations that are trying to do that.
Yep.
If anyone's listening, I'd love to help out.
Funny you say that, because even now I'm thinking, like, as you were saying that, I was like, even for our own podcast, like thinking about, we just sort of, I mean, in a lot of ways, we are only serving a certain portion of the community, because if I think about my parents who try their best actually to listen to this podcast, but it goes over my mom's head just because she just can't understand on a language basis what we talk about. 100%, a lot of those who have maybe the language challenges being in this country are the ones who actually, you know, need it most, right? I also think about, even on a very fundamental level, like migrants who come here, or students who come here from other countries.
International students.
Yeah, and this is the stuff that they probably, and we've had a lot of, I guess, people reach out who have probably a better grasp of English as a second language or third language, and really love the podcast because they don't feel so much alone, I guess, in this sort of proverbial journey or battle as well. So you're 100% right. Language and cultural literacy, I think, is probably the two biggest, you know, for any organisation, including ours.
I remember like two things. One, when I was in uni and we were doing architecture, and there's this huge issue of the lecturers making these assignments worded in a way that it was unnecessary. And a lot of the Chinese international students would come up to us and like, they had highlighted all of their assignments. This made me almost cry when they showed it to me. And they were like, can you just help me explain, like, what is this word and what is this word? And without knowing that, they can't do the assignment. Like, they're paying 3 times the amount for me to be there, for them to be there. Like, it's insane. But also I remember during COVID, you know, a lot of Asian families have a lot of small businesses, and the COVID help for anything. My parents couldn't read anything. I was on the phone for like 5 hours trying to reach out to the government. And again, like, it's not until now after COVID that they've actually introduced Chinese or other languages into the government system. And we're supposed to be some multicultural country.
And like, I think sometimes as well, like when you look at things like that, it's not malicious. Like sometimes sometimes people don't have the intention of not being inclusive, but it's not about the intention. I think it's actually about, well, what is the impact? And the impact in your case was that your parents didn't have access to healthcare information that is like so important, and they're probably more vulnerable because they're part of that community. Same with my parents. I was recently I read an article the other day of like pulse oximeters that read our pulse, you know, to check whether or not, you know, our heart's kind of like healthy, and there was like some sort of bias in the way that they built that pulse oximeter as well, because it didn't read darker skin.
Oh my God.
And it didn't give proper readings, and it had inaccurate readings for darker skin. Yeah. So this is like the problem. This is like, it goes deeper than just people feeling kumbaya included. There can be some real health implications.
Holy crap.
like implications down the line. Like, we need to all be thinking about this. I think there's a bigger ethics lens that we need to see culture
it's ingrained
through.
Literally in the psyche, right?
And so you can see the impacts, like even the way that like a healthcare, like, can you imagine if that was like a defib? If somebody was like having a heart attack on the floor and the defib didn't work for some reason. I'm not saying that's not actually true, but I'm just saying, imagine worst case scenario that was like the case.
Life or death. Yeah.
That's literally someone's life just because they're a different colour. And just because they didn't consider that.
I got told the other day, this was yesterday, I had a call of someone very well known in sort of the diversity space, actually a First Nations person, a lot of respect for her. And she told me this like sort of piece of trivia, and she said apparently there's a lot of, in the Constitution, I don't know what state, I want to say it's Victoria, but I could be wrong, that it's written in the Constitution that the state government can still veto your vote.
What?
If you are essentially something along the lines of like basically an ethnic background.
Really?
Yeah, and here's the double crazy thing. She said it wasn't even used for the First Nations people. She says because at the time that they brought it in, which was around the White Australia policy, this was actually more targeted at the Chinese because it was during the gold rush period. And they saw them as a bigger threat than the Aboriginals, because the Aboriginals they thought were just going to get wiped out through euthanasia anyway.
Oh, that's terrible.
Like I was like, holy shit, when she said that. I was so shocked.
Shocking.
Yeah.
But then again, the whole conversation goes to, why do we need representation? Or like, yes, you're just ticking a box, but people don't realize from top down how much it trickles. Like, again, you're saying the nuances or a certain lens on things and how little details can tie into the systems about how people operate or how the culture fits for the rest of the team, right?
Yeah. Well, it comes back down to, well, when you say representation, I really think representation matters. You're making me think of this recent discussion that I had with a few of my friends and colleagues. Alongside another colleague, I do this thing called an ethics monthly reading group. And essentially what it is because we're both really passionate about ethics, and we're both really passionate about healthy challenge and discussion and robust discourse. And I think we've kind of lost the art of that, to be honest. We're very polarized right now in society, and we're not really good at navigating this grey area. So we thought, let's pitch this idea, and, it got supported at our workplace. And essentially what we do every month is that we throw up a hypothetical ethical dilemma, and it can be about anything. It can be about the ethics of bringing your whole self to work, the ethics of gender equity, the ethics and one recent one that we did was the ethics of having cultural diversity targets. I kind of threw that one up for my own selfish reason because I wanted to hear what the group had to say, and it was a very interesting discussion. And one of the kind of, I can't divulge into the discussion, of course, but I can divulge into one of the themes that came out, which is that discussion between equity versus equality. And they're two very different things, but I think people are still very confused.
Can you unpack that?
Yeah, so I like to use this analogy when I talk about like equity and equality, because people always use the argument, well, it's based on merit, like meritocracy. Like if that person earned it, then they should get the role.
Yep.
And then kind of what you were saying before about, if it's a tick the box, some people are like, oh, it's just a tick the box. They're only in that role because it's a tick the box. And I'm like, no, you're talking about two very different things. So when I talk about equity and equality, I like to kind of encapsulate it in like a visual or an analogy. And you can think of it as like this, like there's two different trees. So they're both beautiful trees and they both bring, they both bring all their different qualities and diversity of thought or whatever you want to think, or different flowers or whatever. One's a cactus. It thrives in the desert. It doesn't need as much water. One's like this beautiful oak tree that, needs a different environment, needs a lot more water. Equality says, well, if you're taking the like premise of equality, then you'd be pouring the same amount of water or watering both trees with the same amount of water.
Got it.
Equity is saying this tree only needs this much because it kind of is like, it's kind of fine, it's doing fine. This one needs a lot more in order to grow to its like full capacity and thrive. And that's the difference between equality and equity. So when we're talking about, when some people might say, and you might hear this, or if somebody comes to you with the argument like, oh, why do we need to give them more support? Like, why do they need extra, support? Like when it comes to, for example, leadership training, or why do they how come they get more of that budget for leadership training, whatever, it could be anything, right? Well, it's because the cactus already has all the resources it needs to thrive, but this one doesn't. So like that, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's just like, I think we need to get better at articulating that and also creating more awareness and understanding about the difference between those two things, because some of the arguments that I've heard against like cultural diversity targets, I'm for targets. I think they set a goal and help us get somewhere. It doesn't mean we have to have them forever. It just helps us get to where we want to be, which is we need to see more people like us in senior leadership roles. And I get really heated and passionate about this, and you can probably feel it through my like body language now. So I don't understand the argument, and it's about, it should just be based on merit. Well, what is merit? Merit's subjective. Merit's in the eye of the beholder. I can go to one recruitment manager and that manager might say, I'm looking for X, Y, Z. I go to another one, they're looking for something else. Like, it's not based on merit. If it was based on merit, then we would actually see a reflection of the Australian community. I think I don't know what the stats are, but if you look at our leadership in any organisation or any big corporate, there isn't a direct reflection in terms of like ratio or like stats of people that look like us in leadership.
Yep. So
that's not merit. That's not equality or equity. It's just a sea of white. Like we don't see it. So I don't get that argument, but I'm also very open to listening to it because I want to understand why do they think that way, because that's helpful for me to then develop the things that we need to develop and develop that literacy for those individuals. And you know what, you might not convert everyone, and that's okay. You just need to find people that are allies and that want to work towards the same kind of goal, because otherwise it can be very tiring.
It's like the flip side of it. Like some people who might not understand our side of the argument might not have the resources to understand that, because they come from a perspective of this is just their world. They don't see, say, the inequality or lack of equity in a society. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think what you're saying is like, when you said, oh, look, I'm very open to understanding it, I think that's what's missing.
Yes.
A lot of the time it's like, ultimately for me, the word I use is lack of empathy, because empathy essentially is the case of trying to understand the position of someone else in order for you to get a better understanding of who they are and how they think. And, you know, whether it's social media and maybe even just mainstream media at the moment, I think the problem, and I've said this many times before, is that there seems to be very extreme opinions, and we're not appreciating the grey that you're talking about. And you can have people who sort of sit across this spectrum of grey when it comes to it.
Yeah.
But like, as you were saying that, I was like, well, I definitely agree with what you're saying, but then how do you, in a practical sense, how do you do this? Like, how do you apply this in, say, an organisation like, say, the Reserve Bank where you are, in order to ensure that there is equity, for example?
Well, I think, first of all, you can't like fix the problem overnight. It's a long game. And you're not always going to, like I mentioned, you're not always going to convert everyone, or everyone's not going to be on the same page. And that's okay, because that's diversity of thought. That's important. I think it starts by just having conversations like this and having conversations like we have in the ethics reading group, where people feel safe and comfortable to bring their whole opinion and self and share that without actually feeling like they're going to be cancelled. And then also people be like cultivating a space for people to feel like they can listen to other people's opinions without feeling offended. And I think that's where it starts. It's having healthy challenge, and all of us kind of creating a space where people can ask, okay, well, why is that? Why do you think that way? And not feel offended by their answer, but just respectfully disagree. And I think that's kind of where it starts. I think we need to kind of have, like in Australia, we don't really talk about race. Like, I'll give you an example, Harmony Day. Harmony Day isn't actually what it is. I think it's like International Day for the Elimination of race discrimination, like IDIRD. That's what Harmony Day is. But I feel like this is a bit contentious and people might get upset with me for saying this, but it's not Kumbaya Harmony Day, because we need to first of all acknowledge that there is a problem and our truth, and that we need to be talking about this. And I think that's where it starts, is like just what we normally do, just talk, just share. That's how at least I've kind of done it first. Like, I haven't, obviously they could do it through strategy, and you can talk about systemic, you know, racism and policies that need to change, and obviously that comes down the line. But you can do all of those things. If you don't change the culture and how people feel and the way that people talk about it, it's not going to work. Yeah,
you're talking about the root problem here, which is that you can set up, you know, infrastructure and policies and all that sort of in place, but if you can't change the people behind it, then it's not going to matter really.
Exactly. And I give you an example. Like, you could set a gender equity quota. You could set a culturally diverse target, you know, for leadership. But if the hiring managers or if leadership don't actually understand why we're doing it, or if the organisation or people that are part of that organisation don't understand the importance of equality and having people of diverse cultural background, diversity of thought, all types of diversity, not just cultural diversity, then it's not really going to work, because the people that do move up in those roles are going to feel like they're just there because they're tokenistic, or they're not going to be supported because the policies and the processes and the training and everything else isn't really setting them up for success. Like, it comes in tandem. You need to do both. You can't do one without the other. Right. Yep. I'm really passionate about more like the conversation side of things. And then I think obviously the policies and everything else will support that. Yep. But you can't just do that and then pretend that this is going to be okay. You need this first.
To take a step back, like, where did the passion come from?
I think I've always been really passionate about and always had a very strong value of justice. And I didn't realize this until much later, when I was a bit older. But I can give you like an example and a story. When I was in year 1, I had there was a girl in my class who I will not name, but there was a girl in my class who was neurodivergent. And she was getting picked on by students in the class, but then also the teacher would make her pick up rubbish.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and also would make me pick up rubbish, because I was like the weird kid as well with like eczema and all of that, whatever. And I would be the kid sitting on a chair because I couldn't sit on the carpet because I'm so allergic to dust that I was like that odd one out. But she'd make us like pick up like rubbish on the asphalt playground and also she would make this specific student do it because she thought that she just didn't know better because she was neurodivergent. And I remember feeling so, like, when that happened, I was so appalled by it. And I was only like, I started school at 4, so I was only like 5.
Yeah.
I was like felt so wronged by this that I wrote a letter to the principal at the time as a 6-year-old, probably with spelling mistakes and whatever, saying like why it was like not right. And then it like turned into like a full-on meeting with my parents, with the principal.
You're right.
And I know for a fact that teacher then left the next term. So I don't know if she was terminated. I was too young to ask questions. I don't know if she was terminated, or I don't know if they were just like, you can't work here anymore. But then she left the school and we got another teacher who was like way better and way nicer.
You're right.
But I remember like, I'm pretty sure we still have that letter somewhere at home. But I obviously had this like strong sense of like, that's not fair.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do that. And then I realized as well the power of using my voice at like such a young age. Like, maybe I couldn't vocalize it, but I could kind of write it down and say how it impacted me and how it impacted my friend and why it wasn't fair and all the reasons why you shouldn't do that. And I think it kind of stemmed from there. So I think it's always been in me, but then I think it's also, in terms of my passion for like diversity and inclusion, I think it's seeing my parents go through what they had to go through. Me, myself being like first generation Australian, having to kind of navigate Western culture, but then also very much belong to Eastern culture on my own. I think like my siblings as well, because my parents, I guess, understanding of Australia is so different to me and my experience. So kind of having to do that on my own as well. So I think that's where it comes from, like the passion for that. And I think it's just I also think it's the right thing to do. Like, I'm not just passionate about culturally diverse and culturally diverse like inclusion. I'm passionate about all sorts of inclusion, like First Nations. I'm passionate about gender equity. I'm passionate about like making sure that we have more people that are part of like the neurodivergent spectrum, like at work. I think that's so important. But then also like seeing my sister having to go through like chronic illness still now after going through cancer. I'm really passionate about making workplaces like accessible and making sure we include everyone, because it's so unfair. I remember as well like having these thoughts at like when we would go to the beach, we'd go to Cronulla, that was like our local beach when we were little, and thinking like, oh my gosh, if I didn't have these like legs, I wouldn't be able to like walk down onto the sand.
You're very acutely aware of this
I was
stuff,
just
right?
I just felt like really unfair about, like, I was very like angry all the time. And I think I just channeled that like feeling of like that's not fair into the work that I do now. And I think that's probably what drives me. But like I remember feeling like that's so unfair. Like if I was in a wheelchair, like I wouldn't be able to wheel my wheelchair down and get into the water with my family, where that's probably where they might feel the most free, because it's like weightless in the water. Like I'm like, just because we don't have tracks on the beach, or just because we've only got stairs and it's not wheelchair accessible. Like I remember having these thoughts as a very young kid and asking my parents like why all the time. So I think that's probably just where it comes from. I think I've always just been like that.
It's interesting you say that. Like, did your parents give you the space for them to answer you? Because I think we don't give kids enough credit. Like, they are curious about the world and they do ask questions because they see the world in the most blank canvas, right? It is what it is. But yeah, like, did your parents answer those questions for you, or did they kind of stifle you?
I think they answered them in the best way they could, with like the information and the resources that they had. I never ever felt like I couldn't ask something. So I felt very psychologically safe at home to ask what I wanted to ask and to kind of be who I wanted to be. I always felt the most me at home. So yeah, they've never really stifled that. But I think they just encouraged us as well to like get answers from elsewhere if they didn't have them.
I think the strongest motivations like for something like this does come from personal experiences. You know, if not for, you know, the things that you sort of experience whilst growing up, you know, you probably wouldn't necessarily always think that way. And then there's also the innate aspect, you know, being a 5-6-year-old writing letters, right? I was like, no way was I writing letters to the principal at 5 to 6 years of age. But that was something, it seems like, quite innate But I mean, even now, sort of at an older age, you know, again, sort of going through certain things, like for example, even now, having a baby and then having a pram all the time.
Yeah.
I feel like the biggest nuisance in society because like you're one of those people who just, you have to clear space to get into restaurants, to just stuff that I used to take for granted. Walking through, just being able to plant myself on a seat. Now you have to be highly tactical and decide where you eat and how you do that. And I
bring
imagine,
everything as well.
Yeah, exactly. But like, that's not even like a form of a disability or disadvantage. It's just purely me now being aware of the fact that I catch myself thinking, I'm like, imagine if you're in a wheelchair. Imagine if, you know, you had sort of like challenges around, you know, your linguistics, your language wise, like there's all these little things that sort of bubble up to the surface, and you really don't sort of pay attention to it a lot of the time. You might see the messaging out there, but it's not until you experience it. I think there's something about on a senses level and what happens up here that really affects that.
I think as well, like I for like those that are listening, like I think it's I don't want you to feel like you're a bad person for not recognizing it, because it's fine. You're just going through, you've got your own stuff. We've all got our own stuff and we're going through the world in the best way we can. But I think in order to make the world more inclusive and more diverse and to open space for other people, I think it's important to self-reflect and have self-awareness, which is like what usually a difficult experience does. You like self-reflect and you have a bit more self-awareness. But I think we can also cultivate that, like in the workplace, in our friendship groups. Let's just have conversations about, well, what if this? What would I do if that was me or if that was someone else? I think if as long as we do that, then I think like we're on the right track, and we shouldn't like punish ourselves for, you know, we're humans. We're wired to be, you know, biased. Like there is a lot of unconscious bias, and it doesn't mean we're a bad person, but it's important that we catch ourselves. Like if we do have that, oh crap, like why did I have that thought? Oh, it's not because I'm a bad person. It's just because, you know, I'm wired to do that because that's like human nature. But then what can I do to combat that and to make sure that I don't make that mistake again? Like I think that's the most important thing. I think sometimes people are very scared to talk about diversity and inclusion because they're scared to make a mistake. And that's fine. Like I think we should start with the premise that we are all going to make mistakes. I'm going to offend someone. I probably offended someone today. I don't know. Like we will offend someone and we will get it wrong, and that's fine. As long as we ask, you know, how can I do it better? Have the self-awareness to kind of reflect and think, okay, that decision that I made for my team today, especially if you're a leader, you know, that decision that I made for the team today, was I being inclusive? Did I hear all the voices that I needed to hear in the team? Did I make the right decision? What could I have done better? And then not just also have the self-reflection with yourself, but do it with your team and say, did I create a safe space for you? Like, just tell me, give me constructive feedback. Like, I think that is so important. We don't do that enough. And I think also with Asian culture, we're not encouraged to do that. We're not encouraged to question. We're not encouraged to challenge. And that's also one of the reasons why I didn't feel like I fit in, like in general, is because I was always challenging, always questioning, like kind of always I wasn't a naughty kid, but I would like kind of like rub people the wrong way sometimes. Just shut up, Michelle, just get on with it. Just do it.
Like the nuisance more than anything.
Just like, okay, but then like what is the purpose of this? Like I would always ask, well, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of it? What is the impact? What is it? What is the outcome? Like I don't get it. Are we just doing it just to go through the motions?
I find it really sad. And now again, also having a son, like I find it really sad how much curiosity is beaten out of kids growing up. Like it's incredible, because I felt like I had that sort of, you know, I think I had the curiosity of myself during school getting beaten out of me.
That's so quickly. Sad.
Like it was like just you know how people go, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's so much judgment with kids asking very fundamental questions. That could even be on a household level, not even like in a school setting as well, because I think going back to sort of being humans and innate, you sort of grow up being very curious, like watching, you know, my son right now just touch things, feel things, and like you're like, this is stuff that, you know, you don't assign meaning to it. You let them come to their own conclusions about that, and then of course see how that fits into the context of society. But I find it really sad because how many people out there who could have been doing amazing things, you know, and I think, you know, if we're talking about the Asian aspect, it's like how many lives are out there, and it's obviously a massive issue. That's why there's so many tune into this, is like they're doing things that they don't really want to do.
Yeah, because they don't know how to voice it, or they don't know how to move forward.
That makes me so sad.
Yeah.
I was in a recent workshop, like a leadership training workshop, and we were talking about this concept of, and I learnt this at university as well in psych, of divergent thinking. It's the ability to kind of see something and be like, essentially be creative. And you like people at home, or you can also do this exercise as a team. You just give your team, or you know, whatever, like the group of people that you're in, like a paperclip, and you just ask them like a very basic, like what can you do with this paperclip, and give them a timer and see like all of the different uses that people come up with. And like, it was funny because in this workshop, and like, you know, I'm in a very technical space, like everyone's quite technical. So, you know, the facilitator asked like, how many people have got like 5? And then everyone put their hand up. How many people have like more than 7? Put their hand up. There was only about 20 of us in the room. How many people have more than 10? And like no hands up. And my hand was still up. And I think I got up to like 30. But I think I'm not like saying, well, wow, I'm so good at divergent thinking. What I'm saying is that like, I think it's a really important muscle to practice and stretch. Yep. Because when you think about it, the question was just, what can you do with this paperclip? Like, it could be anything really. Like, when you give a kid a paper box, they think it's a freaking car. Yeah. Like, you know, like it could be a hat, it could be a house, like whatever. Like, there's no limit on what that could be. It's what you see. And I think we've lost that, to your point. Is like, why? Like, it's sad for me that that's been kind of...
Yeah, it's really sad. Like, even now, you know, we've got a team of 15, 18 offshore team members who do amazing work, creative space, right? And I find it really sad to see many of them, and this is not me looking down on them as a superior, but it's just like as a society seeing, for example, the Philippines, and I sort of use this term loosely, not in anything other than just, you know, how sad it is. Like, it's like lemmings. It's like they just fit into a box and they get told what to do, and that's how they do it. And no one questions it. Everyone goes out there and just fits in that way. And I think here in maybe, say, a first world country like Australia, and, you know, how fortunate we are in a lot of ways, is we still get fostered to a certain degree somewhat of critical thinking and divergent thinking and things like that. But I can see that even worse in other countries who are still developing, particularly around sort of Southeast Asia, and, you know, don't even get started about, say, like Africa, for example. But yeah, it's just like there's so much talent out there and so much curiosity. It just doesn't seem to. It's sad. It's like we're heading towards like a very homogenous, you know, society in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and when you said that, actually, it made me think about as well. Like, that for them is just a matter of survival.
100%.
Like, and it's like
they don't have time to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's literally like they're just doing the best with the resources they have because they have to. And this is why I'm also really passionate about diversity and inclusion, is because I feel like as well, like that is the purpose of diversity and inclusion. It's to kind of create the space for people that might not necessarily feel heard, or their voices aren't always amplified or highlighted, to kind of come to the fore, so that they can like actually be themselves, and like not just like my parents, they had to kind of just do what they did to survive. And sometimes that's not a reflection of actually, you know, their creativity or their intelligence. Like you said, like they're so amazing. Like, I don't know if that made sense. You can cut that out.
No, it made sense. I'm just thinking, like, even with my team right now, you know, ways that I could sort of incorporate more of it into, you know, what we do. And I'm really cognizant of it because I, you know, grew up in a corporate setting.
Yeah.
And very much so felt, in a lot of ways, challenges to fit right in and be recognised and seen.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about the equity thing, I was like, wow, 100%.
Yeah.
Because some people need more, other people don't really need as much.
Yeah.
And it's more about levelling that playing field in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
About doing that.
I think on that point as well, it's also like redefining, now I'm talking about leadership now, but redefining what leadership is and what good leadership looks like, and how it can come in a variety of ways and different ways. We aspire to, you know, to be a certain leader because that's all we've seen. But you can actually lead in so many ways. Like, you're a parent you're a leader. You know, like if you're a sibling and you're the oldest, you're a leader.
Which she is.
Yeah, exactly. I know she is. That's why I said that, because I listened to that podcast. Listen to that podcast. I know she is. And, you know, like we're all leaders, you know, in space, and there's different ways to lead. Like my mum's a silent leader. My dad's a quiet leader. But they've like raised 4 strong women. Like that doesn't mean, you know, leadership should be like this like hardball, like one size fits all way. I think the onus isn't all, and one thing that I will also say is that, and what I find frustrating as somebody that works in diversity and inclusion and organisational culture, and I'm quite outspoken about it, is that sometimes you get people coming up to you and asking them how they can be better. Like, you know, people that might not belong. And of course, like I'm going to try and help them. That's part of my cause. That's part of my role. That's what I love to do. But also the onus isn't on me to educate you about what you need to do better. You need to go away.
Take matters into your own hands, right?
Do some self-reflection first. Have some self-awareness. And then you can come to me and say like, oh, I think I've done this with my team, or, you know, I've done a bit of self-reflecting, and, you know, I think this is an area that I'm not so great at. And then we can talk about it, but I'm not going to give you...
Michelle, just tell me what to do.
Yeah, I'm not going to give you like a one-on-one, like a 101 ways to be a more inclusive person booklet. Like it's also, it makes me think about as well, like a podcast that I recently listened to about, it was about First Nations, for like making sure that, you know, leaders are more aware of First Nations peoples and their like history and their story. The guest on that podcast asked the person that's first, like that, you know, is First Nations, like, what can I do? And then the person said was like, just go sit on country. Like just go sit on the grass for like a day and then come back to me. And what she was saying is what I just said was just sit and just self-reflect like before you come to me. And I do feel like some of the time, like diversity and inclusion, I guess advocates like ourselves and that are in this space do kind of carry this, like I said this in this at the ABC article that I did last year, like cultural tax. Like it's this tax that we have to pay because we are very, you know, we're very passionate about this space, but then we still carry that and we're not getting compensated for that. It's our time is valuable. So like the onus shouldn't always be on us to do that.
Yeah.
And there's like a huge conversation of like check your privilege, because you can't just go right to the source and be like, hey, tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Whereas you've got this realm of knowledge of you do the work first, you reflect, like you said.
Yeah.
And then you can come back and ask me if you have questions about that. Like do your research.
Yeah.
I'm not here to give you the answers. It's my emotional burden too.
Yeah,
I'm already carrying that.
Exactly. And it makes me think about a conversation that I had with like this, one of my beautiful friends who's white and grew up in very different kind of, you know, upbringing than me, private school. So, and they would categorize it, this is what they said, this I'm not putting words in there, categorize themselves as having white privilege and feeling really like stifled and like ashamed of that in some ways. And we were talking and then I was like saying to this person, like, yes, you have that and it's good that you acknowledge that, but then what can you do about, like, how can you use that privilege that others don't have?
Oh, like use it as a power.
How can you use that to lift
Yeah.
others up and make it about other people? Because like I think as well, like it's not about people that have that privilege. Like obviously you want to like have equality, but there's other ways of, you know, of using that as well. And if you recognize that and you're self-aware of that, then you can like sponsor somebody that doesn't look like you. Like sponsorship's a big one. Mentor someone that doesn't look like you. But not talk at them and tell them how they should be. Listen to their story and understand their struggles and use that privilege to then change the system that you're a part of or you're probably on the board of. Like do that, please. And I was having that conversation with her and with this person, and and I think it kind of like changed the way she thought about it, and she saw it as like, yep, that's me. I need to be self-aware, but I can also like be part of I can be an ally, and this is how
an opportunity.
Yeah,
right?
and being an ally is a verb. It's not it's not just a tag that you put on your like shirt and a badge that you wear around your neck, or a rainbow lanyard. It's a verb. You actually have to do stuff. It's an action. So I was like, you can actually action it at work. Yeah. And I think she felt more empowered by that instead of like embarrassed by her white privilege.
Just to kind of wrap things up as well, and I think a lot of people listening in will get a lot of value out of this, even if it's just hey, like, let's just self-reflect, or a motivation to start conversations. Yeah. But just to leave this on like a nice note, do you have any advice or words you'd like to share with our audience about maybe what they could do, or just anything that you'd like to share?
I think the first thing is, and we mentioned this a lot, is take the time to self-reflect on your journey and also what's important to you. I think that's something that's always stayed true to me, and I think it's now not become like, I don't really like using the word personal brand, but I think people know me for what my values are, what I stand for and what's important to me, because I'm quite vocal about it. Take the time to reflect on what do you value? What are your values as an individual, not as a person part of a family, not as a person part of an organisation. What do you as an individual value? What's important to you? And what are your principles? What are the lines that you just won't cross? How do you want to go about achieving those values? Like, for example, if one of your values is, I don't know, excellence, obviously you're not going to do that in a way that's wrong. You're going to do that in a way that's right, if that's one of your principles. And then, like, what is your purpose? Like, for me, I just want people to feel safe, comfortable and free. And that can be in any different way. Like, that's not just through the work that I do. It's through, like, the friendships that I have. And that's at least my purpose now. And that can change. And I also want to mention, you're allowed to change your values, your principles and your purpose, and they will change. Like, I'm sure yours have changed now that you have a family. So I think take the time to do that, and then just invest in your relationships. I think that's, for me, I'm a relationships person. Take the time to find your tribe and to find people that you feel like safe and comfortable with, and invest in those relationships and share your network. You know, if you know people, share that network. You know, we need to build our community. And I don't think those are like the three key things that I think people can take away. So your values, principles and purpose, invest in your relationships, and then share your community. Let's build our like community. I think those are the three things.
Absolutely, I agree. Here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and open to sharing everything on this podcast today.
No, thank you.
Where can people connect with you?
On LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Very happy for you to add me on LinkedIn. You can find me there. You have my details, I'm sure, somewhere.
Yeah, we'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks so much for tuning in. A lot of work and effort goes into Level Asian with a whole team behind the scenes. While we aren't looking for anyone to pay for this content, what helps the podcast grow, reach more people, and benefit more Asians around the world is if you could leave a 5-star review if you're on Spotify, Apple, Google, or any other audio platforms. And leave us a like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Catch you on the next episode.